He raised his hand and struck me across the face right there in the courthouse hallway. "You're nothing!" he screamed, his spit hitting my cheek. "You'll never get a penny from me." But what happened next in that courtroom? He never saw it coming. Have you ever been so humiliated in public that you wish the ground would just swallow you whole? I was standing outside courtroom 304, clutching my divorce papers with shaking hands. My soon-to-be ex-husband David was there with his expensive lawyer, a woman in a tailored suit who looked at me like I was dirt on her shoe. I was wearing my only decent dress, a navy blue one I'd bought at a thrift store because I couldn't afford anything else after David emptied our joint account. "Look at her," David said loud enough for everyone in the hallway to hear. "She thinks she deserves half of everything I built." His lawyer smirked. Other people waiting for their cases turned to stare at us. My face burned with embarrassment. I tried to walk away, but David grabbed my arm. "Where do you think you're going? We're not done here." That's when he slapped me. The sound echoed through the marble hallway like a gunshot. A security guard started walking over, but David's lawyer waved him off. "Just a domestic dispute," she said coolly. "Nothing to worry about." The guard hesitated, then backed away. I felt so small, so powerless. "You destroyed my business," David hissed in my ear. "You made me look like a fool in front of my clients, and now you want me to pay you? You're delusional." His breath smelled like coffee and arrogance. I touched my stinging cheek and looked around at all the faces staring at us. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed almost entertained by the drama. One woman was actually recording with her phone. "David, please," I whispered, trying not to cry in front of everyone. "We can discuss this like adults." He laughed bitterly. "Adults? You're nothing but a leech who married me for money." "Well, guess what? I've hidden everything where you'll never find it. Offshore accounts, shell companies. My lawyer here is a genius." He patted his lawyer's shoulder proudly. The bailiff called our case. As we walked toward the courtroom, David was practically strutting. He whispered to me one last time, "Judge Harrison is a family friend. This whole thing is just a formality. You'll walk out of here with nothing, just like you deserve." My hands were trembling as I sat down at the plaintiff's table. My public defender looked nervous. He was fresh out of law school and clearly overwhelmed by David's high-powered legal team. But as Judge Harrison walked into the room, something in his expression made my heart skip. He looked directly at me, then at David, and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Be seated," he said in a voice that commanded instant respect. "Let's begin." David was still smiling confidently when the judge opened his folder and began to read. But that smile was about to disappear forever. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought they had all the power, you'll want to hear what happened next. Because sometimes the universe has a way of delivering justice when you least expect it. Judge Harrison looked down at his papers, then directly at David, with eyes that could cut glass. "Mr. Peterson," he said slowly, "I've reviewed the financial documents you submitted." David's lawyer leaned forward confidently, but then the judge continued, "I've also reviewed the FBI Financial Crimes Unit report that was delivered to my chambers this morning." Have you ever watched someone's entire world crumble in real time? The color drained from David's face instantly. His lawyer's confident smile vanished as she frantically shuffled through her papers. "Your Honor," she stammered, "we weren't informed of any federal investigation." "That's because it was sealed until today," Judge Harrison replied calmly. "Mr. Peterson, you've been under investigation for tax evasion, money laundering, and fraudulent business practices for the past 18 months. I couldn't breathe. David's hand gripped the table so hard his knuckles turned white. The same man who had just humiliated me in the hallway was now staring at the judge like a deer caught in headlights. "Furthermore," The judge continued, "Your attempts to hide marital assets through offshore accounts and shell companies constitute contempt of court and criminal fraud. Mrs. Peterson," he looked at me, "I'm sorry you've had to endure not only domestic violence. Yes, we have security footage of the incident in the hallway, but also financial abuse." David tried to stand up. "Your Honor, this is all a misunderstanding. My business dealings are completely legitimate." "Sit down, Mr. Peterson." The judge's voice boomed through the courtroom. "You're already facing federal charges. Don't make this worse by lying under oath." My public defender looked as shocked as I felt. He whispered to me, "Did you know about any of this?" I shook my head. I had no idea my quiet calls to the IRS about David's suspicious financial behavior months ago had triggered an investigation. The judge continued reading from his file. "The federal investigation has uncovered approximately $2.3 million in hidden assets, unpaid taxes totaling $847,000, and evidence of wire fraud involving your construction business." David's lawyer stood up, her composure completely shattered. "Your Honor, we request an immediate recess to consult with our client about these new developments." "Denied," Judge Harrison said flatly. "Mr. Peterson, you are hereby ordered to surrender your passport immediately. You are also ordered to provide full financial disclosure of all assets, domestic and international, within 48 hours. Failure to comply will result in immediate arrest for contempt of court." The bailiff walked over to David's table. David's hands were shaking as he pulled his passport from his jacket pocket. The same man who had slapped me and called me nothing just 30 minutes ago now looked like a scared child. "Mrs. Peterson," the judge addressed me directly, "given the criminal nature of your husband's actions and the hidden assets that rightfully belong to the marital estate, I'm awarding you temporary spousal support of $15,000 per month, effective immediately. This is in addition to your 50% claim on all legitimate marital assets." I felt tears streaming down my face, but for the first time in years, they weren't tears of humiliation or pain. They were tears of relief. David finally found his voice. "Your Honor, please, I can explain everything. This will destroy my business, my reputation." His voice cracked on the last word. The judge closed the file with a sharp snap that echoed through the silent courtroom. "Mr. Peterson, you destroyed your own reputation the moment you decided to commit fraud. Court is adjourned until Thursday for your criminal arraignment." As the judge left the bench, David slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. His expensive lawyer was already packing up her briefcase, probably calculating how to distance herself from this disaster. But the biggest shock was still coming. Because what I discovered about David's business associates would make everything else look like child's play. Sometimes karma doesn't just knock on your door, it kicks it down with a federal warrant. As we walked out of the courtroom, David's lawyer abandoned him faster than a sinking ship. She literally told him, "Find new representation. This firm doesn't handle federal criminal cases." He was left standing there alone, looking around desperately as other lawyers in the hallway avoided eye contact like he had the plague. Have you ever seen someone go from predator to prey in a matter of minutes? My public defender was ecstatic. "Sarah, I've never seen anything like this in 5 years of practice," he whispered excitedly. "The FBI doesn't just stumble onto cases like this. Someone with serious connections wanted your husband investigated." That's when Detective Rodriguez approached us in the hallway. She was a tall woman with kind eyes but a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm with the Financial Crimes Unit. We need to talk." She led me to a small conference room while David sat on a bench outside, staring at his phone like it held the answers to his problems. Through the glass door, I could see him making frantic calls that no one was answering. "Sarah," Detective Rodriguez said, sitting across from me, "your husband wasn't just hiding money from you. He was laundering money for some very dangerous people." My blood ran cold. What do you mean, dangerous? She opened a thick file folder. David's construction company has been used to funnel money for a crime syndicate operating out of Miami. They'd pay him inflated amounts for legitimate construction projects, and he'd clean the money through fake invoices and shell companies. I couldn't process what she was saying. The man I'd been married to for 8 years, the man who lectured me about balancing our checkbook, was a money launderer for criminals? How much money are we talking about? I asked weakly. Over the past 3 years, approximately $12 million. She let that number hang in the air. And here's where it gets interesting for you. These people don't like loose ends. They especially don't like it when their money launderer gets divorced and his wife might start asking questions about where all the money went. Terror crept up my spine. Are you saying I'm in danger? We think David's associates plan to eliminate the problem, she said gently. Eliminate you. We intercepted communications suggesting they were going to make it look like a domestic violence incident gone wrong. I felt dizzy. The room seemed to spin around me. All those times David had threatened me, all those nights he'd come home late, claiming he was working, he'd been planning to have me killed. But David doesn't know we know, Detective Rodriguez continued, and that gives us an advantage. We're going to need your help to bring down the entire operation. Through the conference room window, I watched David pacing frantically in the hallway. His phone was pressed to his ear, and even from a distance I could see sweat stains spreading across his expensive shirt. What do you need me to do? I asked. We need you to act normal. Go home. Act like you're devastated about the divorce proceedings. David's going to be desperate to maintain his cover with his associates. He'll likely try to convince you to reconcile, maybe even apologize for hitting you. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd called me nothing and slapped me in public was about to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness he didn't deserve. When he does, she continued, we need you to wear a wire. Get him to talk about the money, about his business partners. Get him to admit what he's been doing. I thought about all the years I'd been afraid of David, all the times he'd made me feel small and worthless, all the nights I'd gone to bed wondering if I was crazy for thinking something was wrong with our finances. Detective Rodriguez, I said, my voice stronger than it had been in years. What happens to David when this is all over? She smiled grimly. Money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy, tax evasion, and now attempted murder conspiracy. He's looking at 25 to life in federal prison, and that's if he cooperates fully. As if on cue, David appeared at the conference room door. His face was pale and desperate. He knocked gently, so different from the man who'd screamed at me an hour ago. Sarah, he called through the glass, can we please talk? I think we can work this out. Detective Rodriguez looked at me. Are you ready to take down the man who tried to destroy you? I stood up, straightened my thrift store dress, and walked toward the door. David had no idea he was about to confess everything to the FBI. Sometimes the person who underestimates you the most becomes your greatest weapon for justice. I opened the conference room door, and David rushed toward me like a man drowning. Sarah, thank God, we need to talk privately. His eyes were red-rimmed and panicked. Detective Rodriguez had slipped out the back exit, leaving me alone with my wire recording everything. Have you ever had to pretend to forgive someone who tried to have you killed? David, I don't know what to say, I managed, trying to sound broken and confused. Everything happened so fast in there. The judge, the FBI. I let my voice trail off. He grabbed my hands desperately. Listen to me very carefully. None of this is what it seems. Yes, I have some business arrangements that are complicated, but I was trying to protect you by keeping you out of it. I almost laughed at the absurdity. This man had literally planned my murder, and now he was claiming it was for my protection. What kind of business arrangements, David? I asked softly, playing the naive wife perfectly. He looked around the hallway nervously, then pulled me into an empty attorney consultation room. My construction company has some investors, very private investors who value discretion above everything else. What do you mean, private? David started pacing, running his hands through his hair. They give me contracts worth millions, Sarah, legitimate construction work, but they pay in cash, and they need the payments processed through multiple accounts to maintain their privacy. The wire taped to my chest felt like it was burning through my skin. Every word he said was digging his grave deeper. But why didn't you tell me? Why hide it from me? I pressed. Because these people don't like their business discussed, even with spouses. His voice dropped to a whisper. Sarah, if they think you know too much about their operations, they might see you as a liability. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. What kind of liability? David stopped pacing and looked directly at me. The kind that disappears, Sarah. These aren't normal businessmen. They're connected to some very dangerous organizations. Connected how? He was sweating profusely now. Money from their other ventures gets invested in legitimate businesses through my company. I take a percentage for providing the service. Other ventures? Drug trafficking, illegal gambling, loan sharking. The words tumbled out of him like a confession at church. But I never touched the drugs, Sarah. I just cleaned the money. And the money I cleaned bought us our house, your car, everything we have. I felt sick, but I pushed forward. How much money, David? Millions. Every month, millions flow through my accounts. He sat down heavily in a chair. And now, with this divorce, with the FBI investigation, they think you might testify against me. They think you might know something. Do they want to hurt me? I asked, though I already knew the answer. David's silence was deafening. Finally, he looked up at me with tears in his eyes. They suggested that if something happened to you, something that looked like domestic violence, it would solve two problems. The divorce would be over, and there'd be no risk of you talking to federal investigators. My blood turned to ice, but I forced myself to keep going. And you said what? I told them I'd handle it myself. His voice was barely a whisper. Sarah, I was supposed to kill you tonight. Make it look like I lost control during an argument about the divorce. The room went silent, except for the sound of my heart hammering in my chest. This man, who I'd shared a bed with for 8 years, had just admitted to planning my murder. But I can't do it, he continued desperately. I know I've been terrible to you. I know I've hurt you. But I can't kill you, so we need to run. Tonight, we take whatever cash I can access, and we disappear. I stared at him in amazement. Even now, even caught red-handed, he was still trying to manipulate me. David, I said quietly, do you really think I'm that stupid? His face changed. The desperate, pleading expression disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. What do you mean? I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. On the screen was Detective Rodriguez's number, already dialed, the call timer showing 47 minutes and counting. I mean, I said, standing up slowly, that every word you just said has been recorded and transmitted directly to the FBI. The color drained from David's face completely. He looked at my phone, then at me, then back at my phone like he couldn't process what he was seeing. You, he started to say, but no other words came. The woman you called nothing, I said, walking toward the door, just brought down your entire criminal empire. But the biggest surprise was still waiting outside that door, because David's business partners had been listening too, and they weren't happy about his confession. Sometimes when you think you've won, the real game is just beginning. As I reached for the door handle, it burst open from the outside. 2 men in expensive suits pushed into the small consultation room, and I immediately knew these weren't lawyers. The larger one had cold, dead eyes and a scar running from his left ear to his jaw. The shorter one was fidgeting with something in his jacket pocket. Have you ever realized you've walked straight into a trap that was meant to save you? David, the scarred man, said in a voice like gravel. We heard some very interesting things coming from this room. He looked at my phone, still showing the active call. 49 minutes is a long conversation with the FBI. David's face went from pale to grey. Marco, I can explain. Shut up. Marco's eyes never left me. Mrs. Peterson, you've caused us a considerable problem. I was trapped between them and the back wall. My hands were shaking, but I kept my phone visible, hoping Detective Rodriguez could hear everything. I don't know what you're talking about. The shorter man laughed bitterly. She's still playing dumb, Marco, even with a wire taped to her chest. My blood froze. How did they know about the wire? Marco smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen. We've been monitoring police frequencies for months, sweetheart. The moment the FBI started their little operation, we knew. Did you really think we'd let you walk out of here after David's confession? David was backing against the wall. Marco, please. She's just confused. She doesn't understand what she's gotten into. No, David, you don't understand what you've gotten into. Marco pulled out a gun and pointed it directly at David's chest. 20 years of business together, and you were going to run away with your wife. Leave us to clean up your mess. I realized in that moment that Detective Rodriguez had been right about one thing, but wrong about another. David's associates had planned to eliminate loose ends, but David was just as much a loose end as I was. Marco, we've been friends since high school, David pleaded. You know I'd never betray you. Friends don't wear wires to family meetings, the shorter man said, pulling out his own gun, and they definitely don't confess to federal crimes over open phone lines. That's when I understood the full scope of how brilliant Detective Rodriguez's plan had been. She hadn't just wanted David's confession, she'd wanted to force his criminal partners into the open. Mrs. Peterson, Marco said, turning his attention back to me, you're going to hang up that phone and hand it to me. Then you and your husband are going to take a little ride with us. I looked at my phone. The call timer showed 52 minutes. I prayed that Detective Rodriguez had heard everything and that help was on the way. I said, hang up the phone, Marco repeated, raising his gun toward me. No, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. Marco's eyebrows raised. Excuse me? I said no. I held the phone higher. Detective Rodriguez, if you can hear me, there are 2 armed men in consultation room B holding us at gunpoint. Marco lunged toward me, but before he could reach my phone, the door exploded inward. FBI agents in tactical gear flooded the small room, shouting, Federal agents, drop your weapons! The next 30 seconds were chaos. Marco spun toward the agents, his gun raised. The shorter man dove behind a chair. David pressed himself against the wall, screaming, Don't shoot! Don't shoot! I heard gunshots. I heard shouting. I felt someone tackle me to the ground and cover me with a bulletproof vest. When the noise stopped, Marco was on the floor, clutching his shoulder and cursing in 3 different languages. The shorter man was face down, with his hands zip-tied behind his back. David was sitting in the corner, rocking back and forth like a child. Detective Rodriguez helped me to my feet. Sarah, are you hurt? I looked around the room at the chaos, at the blood on the floor, at David sobbing in the corner. Detective, I said slowly, how long have you been listening outside that door? She smiled grimly. Since the moment you walked into this room, we've had the entire courthouse surrounded for the past hour. David's friends have been under surveillance for months. We just needed them to make their move. I stared at her. You used me as bait. You used me as bait. We used you as the final piece of evidence we needed to take down a criminal organization that's been operating for over a decade, she corrected. And you did it perfectly. As the paramedics treated Marco's gunshot wound and the agents led David away in handcuffs, I realized something profound. The woman David had called Nothing hadn't just brought down his criminal empire. I'd helped bring down an entire organized crime network. But the story wasn't over yet, because what I discovered about the money they'd been laundering would change everything I thought I knew about my own life. Sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage you never knew you had. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in Detective Rodriguez's office when she slid a thick manila folder across her desk. "Sarah, there's something else you need to know about the money David was laundering." Her expression was serious, almost apologetic. "Something we discovered that changes everything. Have you ever learned that your entire life was built on a lie so big it rewrote your personal history?" I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were bank records, wire transfer receipts, and photographs of documents I'd never seen before. The first page showed a transaction from 2015, the year David and I bought our house. "I don't understand," I said, scanning the numbers. "This shows a payment of $300,000 from something called Rodriguez Import-Export." Detective Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Sarah, that's the front company for the drug operation. But look at the memo line on that transaction." My eyes found the small print at the bottom. "Settlement payment, S. Chen inheritance claim." My maiden name, my blood turned to ice. "Detective, what does this mean?" She leaned forward. "Sarah, do you remember your grandmother Chen, who passed away in 2014? Of course I remembered her. She'd raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. She was a sweet old lady who ran a small import business, bringing traditional Chinese medicines and textiles to the United States. Your grandmother's import business wasn't just importing legal goods," Detective Rodriguez said gently. "She was one of the primary entry points for heroin coming from Southeast Asia. When she died, she left behind a criminal empire worth over $50 million. I felt like the ground was falling away beneath me. "That's impossible. My grandmother was a saint. She donated to charity. She went to church every Sunday." "The best criminals often do," she replied sadly. "Sarah, when your grandmother died, her criminal associates came looking for her heir, you. David didn't just stumble into money laundering. He sought you out specifically because you were Chen's granddaughter." The folder slipped from my numb fingers, papers scattering across the floor. "Are you telling me David married me for my inheritance from a drug empire?" "We think so. The timeline matches perfectly. You met David 6 months after your grandmother's death, right? At that coffee shop near your apartment." I nodded mechanically. I remembered that day so clearly. This handsome, successful businessman had spilled coffee on my laptop and insisted on buying me a new one. It had seemed like fate. "It wasn't coincidence, Sarah. David's criminal associates had been watching you, waiting for the right moment to approach. David was their inside man." I thought about our entire relationship through this new lens, the whirlwind romance, his insistence that we get married quickly, his immediate control over our finances, the way he'd isolated me from my grandmother's old friends and business associates. So the house, the cars, everything we had, everything, was bought with your inheritance money, money you never knew existed because David intercepted all the legal documents. As your husband, he had legal authority to handle your grandmother's estate. I laughed bitterly. So the man who called me nothing and tried to have me killed built his entire life with money that was rightfully mine? $53 million, Sarah. That's what your grandmother left behind. And that's what David has been laundering through his construction company for the past 8 years. Detective Rodriguez pulled out another document. But here's the beautiful irony. Because David never legally processed your inheritance, and because he used it for criminal activities, the federal government is seizing all of his assets as proceeds from criminal enterprise. What does that mean for me? She smiled for the first time since I'd entered her office. It means that under the Whistleblower Protection Act and asset forfeiture laws, you're entitled to recover your stolen inheritance plus damages, plus a percentage of the criminal assets we've seized. I stared at her. How much money are we talking about? Conservatively, $78 million. The number hung in the air like a surreal dream. The woman David had slapped in a courthouse hallway and called nothing was about to become one of the wealthiest people in the state. "There's one more thing," Detective Rodriguez said, pulling out a final photograph. "This is your grandmother's real will, the one David hid from you." I looked at the document, written in my grandmother's careful handwriting. At the bottom, there was a personal note. "To my beloved Sarah, I know the money comes from dark places, but I pray you will use it to bring light into the world. You are everything I hoped you would become." Tears streamed down my face as I realized my grandmother had known exactly what her business was, and she trusted me to do better with her legacy. 6 months later, I testified at David's sentencing hearing. He got 35 years in federal prison. Marco got life without parole. And I started the Chen Foundation, using my inheritance to fund programs that help victims of domestic violence and drug addiction. The day David was sentenced, he looked at me across the courtroom one last time. I could see him mouth the words, "You were nothing." I smiled and mouthed back, "I was everything." Sometimes the person who tries to destroy you ends up giving you the key to your own power. And sometimes being called nothing is exactly what you need to discover you're everything you never knew you could be. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or made to feel small, remember this story. Because the person who sees you're worth the least might just be the person standing on the fortune that was always meant to be yours. Thank you for following Sarah's incredible journey from victim to victor. If you believe in the power of turning your lowest moments into your greatest triumphs, share this story and remember, you're never nothing, no matter who tries to tell you otherwise.